Well, a very warm welcome into this episode of the HuddleUK podcast. It's coming out a bit early. We got it out on a Thursday instead of a Saturday, and for good reason. Football is back. I say that a few times in this episode. I will forewarn you now. Football is back. It's been a long, long old wait since the Super Bowl. I've been counting down the days now for a good while. I put on the X account on Monday that there's only 3 more days. It is today. Technically at 1 o'clock in the morning tomorrow, if you are listening to this on Thursday, the day of release. But it would have been 171 days since the Super Bowl when the game comes around. So it's been a long time. Thank you very much for tuning in. I'm your host, Philip Marsh, as always. We've got some exciting guests lined up. We've got to talk about the Hall of Fame game. We've got to do a deep dive on those players being inducted this year. It's been a bit of a tongue twister with all the Allens. So we've got former Eagles cornerback Eric Allen and then former Vikings defensive edge Jared Allen. There's also former Chargers tight end Antonio Gates and Sterling Sharpe, of course, the former Green Bay Packer, one of the best wide receivers to play the game before his injury cut his career short. We'll get into all of those. We've got 3 reporters from out in the States joining us who cover the respective teams. So a big thank you in advance to Scott Grayson, who's back on the podcast for the second time. The Eagles report is great to chat to him. We've also got Jeff Wald, who's joining us to talk Minnesota Vikings. For the Packers, we've actually got the founder of the UK and Irish Packers Twitter account, the fan group, the biggest NFL UK and Ireland fan page. So if you're a Packers fan, make sure to go check them out on Twitter. And to round us off to talk about the Chargers, or in fact, the first guest up on the podcast today to talk about the Chargers is Fernando Ramirez. So a big thank you to all of those. And right at the end, myself and the Lions writer for the HuddleUK, Archie Tooth, will be just running through a few of the players you can expect to see, a few of the fringe players or further down the depth chart who we're excited to see in this Hall of Fame game. Before we get into the conversations, as always, just a plug to make sure if you're listening to this on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, please click that 5-star review if you're enjoying what you're listening to. If you're on YouTube, click that subscribe button, click the bell to make sure you don't miss any of the uploads. We've changed all the thumbnails here on YouTube as well. We've got some bright, shiny new ones, and all the shorts, all the clips from these episodes will be on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, all the rest of it. Go follow us on social medias at Join the Huddle UK. Without further ado, let's get into some of these NFL greats, some of the best to play who are rightfully going into the Hall of Fame this year. We're going to start with my team. We have to, with the former Chargers tight end, the legend that is Antonio Gates. Well, the first player we want to talk about in this Hall of Fame game, it's the player whose team is represented there as well, Antonio Gates, former Chargers tight end. As I said at the top of the show, we're going to get the thoughts of reporters, beat reporters out in the States who represent those teams. Joining us now is the Sporting Tribune's Fernando Ramirez. Fernando, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me on. And you know what? I'm not well. I had a bunch of bugs bite me at camp the other day at training camp. I was wearing shorts for the first time. Wearing shorts. We're going back to jeans, and we're not doing shorts again. The bugs just they really got after me. So yeah, we're sticking to what we know. But thank you so much for having me.
I want to talk to you about training camp as well in a little bit, but we've got to start with the main man of this week, Antonio Gates. He's finally, I know it's only been the second ballot that he had the opportunity to get in the Hall of Fame, but I think most people thought he would have got in at the first attempt. There's a lot of cries saying that he was snubbed last year, considering, he's most touchdowns of any tight end, third in receptions and yards. But we'll ignore the snub. This is a player who deserves it 100%, and it will be a great moment in Canton for him and the Chargers.
No, it definitely will be, especially because Antonio Gates was a basketball player. He was really the first of his kind, a basketball player that Nick Saban offered him a scholarship when he was at Michigan State, and Antonio said, "I'll come, but I want to play basketball and I want to play football." And he told him nope. So he's like, "All right, I'm not going to go then." And then he goes to Kent State, plays basketball, gets them to, I think it was the Elite Eight. They got bounced out. And then he's like, "Well, what am I going to do now?" He's too small for basketball. And he decides, you know what? I'm going to try the NFL. He has a couple of workouts. He worked out with the Chargers. He's like, "I want to be here." Comes to the Chargers and ends up turning around and turns around the whole franchise. And that's really when they had their boom. When they brought Antonio Gates in, you have LT emerging as one of the best running backs. You have Drew Brees. The team starts getting really good. Antonio comes out of nowhere and right at the beginning just catapults himself into the tight end conversation with Tony Gonzalez. I feel like everybody has their Batman and Superman. Peyton Manning and Tom Brady had each other. Other players have other people to go against. Tony Gonzalez and I think Antonio Gates were that one too, where everybody was wondering who's better, who's better. But Antonio really revolutionized the tight end position, and what an incredible career he had for the Chargers.
Yeah, you mentioned the basketball career. I remember in the research for this podcast, I saw that he was called a tweener, was the
Yeah.
word that people were referring to as at 6'4". I'm 6'4" myself. I can't imagine most people calling me a tweener. I
Are
guess
you
in the
really?
world of the NBA where everyone's 6'10", and so you are a bit smaller, but he never looked small on the field. And
No.
as you said, an undrafted free agent back in 2003,
Yep.
there can't be many. There are a couple that spring to mind, but there can't be many better undrafted free agents in the history of the NFL, are there?
No, no. Antonio, I mean, he broke the record for most touchdown catches by a tight end, 116. And get this, he only does it with four quarterbacks. And sorry, only three quarterbacks: Doug Flutie, Drew Brees, Philip Rivers. The other fourth person that threw him touchdown pass was LaDainian Tomlinson. So to do everything that Antonio Gates did with only three quarterbacks and a running back throwing him a pass, I mean, it's phenomenal. I know Justin Herbert, when he first got to the Chargers, he was like, "Dang, I wish I could have played with Antonio," after he met him a couple of times during training camp. So you could just tell Antonio was the perfect teammate. I talked to Manti Te'o on Saturday, and I was like, "What did Antonio Gates mean to this team?" He's like, "Fernando, he would come over after we would go one-on-ones, and he'd go, Manti, no, do this, move your body this way, shift this way, do this, move your feet and do this." And then Derwin James also was saying that Antonio told him, Derwin, when you're guarding a tight end, what you want to do is you want to get physical with them. You want to put your hand in there. Don't be scared to throw your hand in there when the ball's coming at him. And guys just really raved about him. Stevie Johnson was another one. Keenan Allen called him his big brother. So the team really gravitated towards Antonio, and he really was one of the best teammates these guys had, and overall just a great guy to talk to. I mean, I remember I was a young intern during the last few years of the Antonio Gates era, and Antonio would talk to me and he would chat with me, and it's like you're a little shy, you're kind of going up to him and you're just chatting about random stuff about the game. And I just remember that Antonio was always, when I became a reporter, even he became an even better dude. But Antonio was always a great guy to be around in the locker room, and he truly deserves all the accolades. And like you said, 1 year late, but at least it's happening, because Antonio's literally one of one. Just the skill set that he had, I don't think we'll ever see again as a tight end.
You beat me to the punch there because I was about to say, not is, the Hall of Fame is about players and what they did on the field, but everything you hear about Antonio Gates, you've been lucky enough to work out there as a reporter and meet him and speak to him yourself. I don't think I've ever seen anyone have a bad word to say about him.
No. It's just, the San Diego and Tijuana are right next to each other. We have a bunch of buddies and stuff that are reporters from Mexico, and they would chat with Antonio, and Antonio would chat with them, and he would even try and learn a little bit of Spanish. He'd have guys teach him so that he could be able to understand what guys were saying. But Antonio really, I mean, he would chat with everybody. He'd be back and forth, and he loved having conversations. I think that's what he really appreciated, is getting to know people, the conversations. Him and Philip Rivers had the locker right next to each other, and they were just it was interesting to see them interact sometimes in the locker room. Just all of a sudden they'd be laughing and joking around and stuff. So it was definitely interesting to see the way kind of Gates interacted with the media, with Chargers personnel, and with teammates. He literally he was like, when he walked into the room, you knew Antonio Gates was like walking by, just because everybody would start laughing with him, or they'd toss something at him, or like somebody would toss a towel, or just a lot of joking around when it came to Antonio Gates. He literally was one of the happiest players I think I've ever been around. He just always had a smile on his face.
franchise records for receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns, all eclipsing the likes of Allen, who got to 10,000 yards 2 seasons ago, I
Yep.
believe. It just puts in perspective, just because I think a lot of UK fans, not all UK fans, some have been watching it since the early 70s, the 80s, when it started going on TV. The highlights a week late. But a lot of the fans over here, I think, have got into it in the last 10, 15, 20 years and may not have seen the whole of Gates's career. But you've touched upon it. Sort of changed the game, had his own athletic profile, and the numbers speak for themselves to end what was a phenomenal career.
No, and I think what people forget is that Gates had a bad wheel. When I say a bad wheel, a bad foot. He had plantar fasciitis. There was a game against the Tennessee Titans. I think it was 2007. I think it was 2007 where Keith Bullock comes in. Gates is already on the ground. Keith Bullock comes in, hits him, and his foot got caught underneath. He had a plantar fasciitis the rest of his career, so there was times where he'd have to miss games, or that foot would just flare up. If he doesn't have that injury, Gates might have had another 20, 25 touchdowns and definitely a lot more yards. The problem is he had that foot injury that would always flare up. But man, it was just incredible. The one performance I just can't get over, and I was in person for this, and this is the craziest part. They play Seattle after Seattle had won the Super Bowl. So Seattle had beaten up on the Broncos. They come and play the Chargers in San Diego, and it's 120 degrees on the field. And the Chargers are complaining about it. The Seahawks are complaining about it. It's one of those killer days. And Gates just goes off for 96 yards and 3 touchdowns. And each of them, one of them he caught on Cam Chancellor, one on Earl Thomas, and I can't remember who he caught. The other one was against, I think, KJ Wright or Bobby Wagner. And you're just like, wow. And after the game, I remember everybody's like, Legion of Boom who? Like Antonio Gates just made mincemeat of their defense. And he really did. He was all over the place, just making one-handed grabs, catching in the end zone, one in between two guys where you thought he had gotten sandwiched and hurt, and he just lifts the ball up in the air like, oh yeah, no, I caught this. So Antonio just it was fun to watch his career, and I still believe that Gates might have had another year left in him if he would have thought the team was that good, and obviously if the team wanted to bring him back. But I thought if they would have had Gates one more year, they could have made one final push at it. But yeah, no, Gates was definitely one of one, just one of the best to do it. And like I said, he really used his basketball skills on the field. So elusive, like he was too big for a safety to cover and too fast for a linebacker, which is unheard of. I mean, I know Kelsey and some of these guys today, but it's funny going back to that. Last year, Travis Kelsey was leaving after the Chiefs had played the Chargers in week, no, 2 years ago, after the Chiefs had played the Chargers. It was when the Chiefs won their Super Bowl. It was where he had just started dating Taylor Swift and everything. Last game of the season, he doesn't play Kelsey because they wanted to rest him for the playoffs. He's walking out of the locker room, and I'm like, dang it, I wanted to ask him a question about Gates, and I was like, you know what, screw it. He's walking right by, and I go, Travis, what do you think of Antonio Gates? Like, Antonio Gates is the godfather of the tight end position. He's one of one. He deserves to go in the Hall of Fame. And Kelsey was one of the loudest people after Gates didn't make it in. He's like, how did he not make it in? So so yeah, the younger guys, they know exactly. That's the thing I love about the tight end position. All these guys know exactly who came before them. Like Antonio would always rave about Kellen Winslow, Tony Gonzalez, and now these younger guys, they rave about the Kelseys, the Gronkowskis, all that. So it's cool to see kind of the way that the tight end ladder is. That's why they have a tight end U camp out here in the States every year.
Yeah, just to put it in perspective before we move on, there's only 8 other tight ends in the history of the NFL who can claim to have scored half as many touchdowns as Antonio Gates. You look at the likes of Zach Ertz, brilliant
Yeah.
tight end, 53 touchdowns, Mark Andrews, 51, George Kittle, 45, and then you've got Antonio Gates on 116.
Like none of the current tight ends are close to him even.
Travis
Even
Kelce is 36 behind.
yeah, he ain't gonna catch that.
That's the closest of the active ones. Is Jimmy Graham still hanging around at the end? He's got 89 in his career. So, but yeah, none of them come close. Tony Gonzalez, of course, was 5 away in 34 more games. So,
What do you think? What do you think happens? Whose record do you think gets broken first? LT's total touchdowns in one season, which I think was 31, or Antonio Gates's all-time touchdown receptions for a tight end. Which one do you think gets broken first?
I think LT's record gets broken first. It would have to be one of the, one of these newer guys, your Sam Laportas, maybe your Brock
Exactly.
Bowers, if in years to come might get
Brock
there.
Bowers
But
will challenge it.
yeah, Brock
Well,
Bowers looks like
depending
he
if they
could.
can get the quarterback situation fixed in Vegas. But yeah, no, I definitely agree with you.
And just to swing it back, just to move on from Antonio Gates, because I wanted to quickly talk Chargers.
Yeah.
You've been covering the camp. There's a million players I want to ask you about, but we don't have time to go through all of them. As we're on the subject of the tight ends, one of the players that I think a lot of Chargers fans are interested to see is Aronde Gadsden, who was the draft pick, I think fourth round, maybe fifth round this year. And the other rookies, of course, Marion Hampton, Trey Harris, Keandre Lambert-Smith, I've seen as well, has been making quite a bit of buzz in camp.
Yeah.
From what you've seen up there in training this week, I know it only started recently, training camp open for the rookies a bit longer, but what have you seen? What's your impressions been so far? And is there anyone that has stood out to you?
Let me just tell you one thing. Everybody's talking about, oh, it's the first day in pads for some teams. We we've been in camp. The Chargers have been in camp now for 2 weeks, so it's been a whirlwind. But let me give you a quick rundown on each of the rookies. Omarion Hampton just glides, man. When I say glide, like it looks like his feet don't even touch the ground when he's running. He's just so elusive, so physical. Najee Harris hasn't been there, so it's been him kind of taking all the snaps, getting a relationship with Herbert, gaining a relationship with the offense. He's looked very good. Man, he's just so explosive that I think the Chargers got a really good draft pick. When you go to Trey Harris, the back shoulder throws, the throws down the field, he finds ways to get open. Now, obviously, Jim Harbaugh has talked about this, and he said, look, Joe Walt and Lad McConkey put up incredible numbers last year, and I don't want these two guys to come in and think, hey, we have to match up. We have to match what Lad and what Joe Walt did. He's like, that's not what I want. But it's just hard to see with Mike Williams not here. Trey Harris kind of slides into that wide receiver 2 or 3 position, and he's just looked very good. He's made some catches. He's had a drop here and there, but he's been very good as well. And then when you look over at like you said, Keandre Lambert-Smith, he and I remember Greg Roman has been saying he looks like Brandon Lloyd. Brandon Lloyd was very good with the 49ers, with the Broncos, and with the Patriots. Very explosive receiver, very quick. He can make circus catches. And that's what, when they were practicing in San Diego for the 2 days, that's what Keandre was doing, just making ridiculous circus catches. And you're just like, wow, okay. So he's been very impressive. Aronde Gadsden, he's been exactly what everybody thought he was going to be, a big tight end. He's very fast, very quick. They haven't really used him as much. Like I want to say, I think during the season they might split him out from tight end to receiver, have him go up and make big grabs. He had a lot of big grabs at Syracuse where he would high point the ball, go up for it, and come down with it. So I think we're going to see more of that. But those guys, all those guys, have made an impact, and the Chargers are very excited about all the rookies because it looks like they're each going to make plays this year, and it looks like each of them is going to be able to make their mark. And like I said, the team's very excited about this group of rookies. Like last year the Chargers hit on 4 of them, and they're still waiting to see what Junior Colson and Justin Igboibe is going to be. And Justin's been flashing in camp, so they're very excited about the other 2 rookies from last year that didn't really show much. Now they're showing some stuff this year in training camp. So the Chargers are very excited about their 2 draft classes combined, of the 2 draft classes of Joe Ortiz.
Yeah, and as you said, they hit last year, didn't they, on the majority of picks? It'd be good to see if they can do it again. Just very quickly, I don't make any secret about the fact I'm a Chargers fan. The last episode of this podcast we had out, I was wearing a Chargers jersey for one of the segments, so I won't hide the bias, but um, I think looking on paper that this team has improved from last year. Obviously, they've lost some key players. Poona Ford's a disappointing loss, but you can never keep anyone. That's sort of the joy of this sport. It's always a revolving door. What would be your assessment as someone who's been watching the training camp the last couple of weeks going into 2025? Obviously, you can't predict injuries and things like that, but on paper, where do you think this team stacks up in both the AFC West and the NFL as a whole?
Well, AFC West, I have them right behind the Chiefs again. I know people are really putting Denver right behind them. I just can't do that just because I didn't think Denver did much on the offensive side of the football. They focus on the defense, which is great, but I think the Chargers really focused on the offense and the defense, and they brought in some guys. You said Poona Ford's gone. Naquan Jones, Deshaun Hand, those are two guys that they're really hoping can come out of their shell. Jamari Caldwell, their third-round pick, he's had some flashes in camp, so they're very excited about their defensive line. Overall, I have them behind behind Kansas City again. The Chargers haven't won this division since 2009. LT's last year was the last time that these guys won the division, so they're going to have to be on their P's and Q's this year to try and win that. And Kansas City looks like they may be the most vulnerable this year. But I mean, we've been saying that for the last 9 years, and they've still won the division 9 years in a row. So that'll be interesting. Now, the one thing that I'm wondering is Jim Harbaugh in his second season at every team has taken a huge step forward. Is this going to be the year where Jim takes a huge step forward and he leaps them into an AFC championship? Because I'm going to be honest, Justin Herbert needs wins in the playoffs. Jim Harbaugh is going to need a couple of wins to show the fans, to show everybody, yeah, no, we mean business. And they've been talking about it since last year. These aren't the same old Chargers. Fans are very excited, but they need to win a playoff game. I think two, but I know what Charger fans down here are holding hope on is Peyton Manning didn't win his first playoff game until his 6th year in the league, and that's where Justin Herbert is right now. So if they could make the divisional after winning in the wild card, or if they can get to the AFC Championship, that's a very successful season. But yeah, I think they're one of the better teams in the NFL. I think they're one of the better coach teams in the NFL, and I think they're gonna challenge Kansas City this year for the division, in my opinion.
I saw one YouTuber say because they lost to Houston in the playoffs last year, and Houston, they call it H-Town. They tried Chargers have made everything H-Town with Herbert, Hampton, Harris, Harbaugh, and there were even more. It goes on. Henley,
Yeah.
yeah, there's countless H's there. So they're trying to be the better H-Town. Fernando, thank you very, very much for joining us. It's been great chatting to you. Good to see Antonio Gates get into the Hall of Fame after his first year snub. And you can go follow Fernando as well over on Twitter at RealFRamirez. It's been a pleasure chatting to you. We've got a few more players to rattle off though as well before we get to the end of the episode. Until next time for the Chargers though. Well, that's enough talk about the Chargers. I talk about the Chargers way too much. We're going to have to move on to another player, one of the other Hall of Fame players who's been inducted this week, and that is Sterling Sharpe, a player that a few of you, I imagine quite a few of our listeners, never saw play, played a good few decades ago now in the late 80s, early 90s, all for the Green Bay Packers before his career was unfortunately cut short. Delighted to say that joining us, we've got some American reporters on for the other guests, but we are joined by the UK and Irish Packers founder, Steve. Steve, how are you doing?
Good, very good. Yeah, finally Sterling Sharpe is in the Hall of Fame. So I'm here to pontificate on top of my soapbox here about how this is a long time coming.
Yeah, well, we just mentioned about Antonio Gates because a lot of people thought he would be a first ballot Hall of Famer. He got in the second time of asking, but for Sterling Sharpe, the wait's been, well, decades now.
Look, he stopped playing in '94, and again, look, why didn't he get in? Because people look at this and go, "Who is this guy?" You know, because Shannon Sharpe. They've seen a lot of tape of Shannon Sharpe. Unfortunately, we've heard a lot of tape from Shannon Sharpe as well, but we're going to leave that aside. But look, Shannon Sharpe, undersized tight end, seen as this big sports personality, kind of overshadowed his brother because his brother's kind of the opposite. He's very, very quiet. Even when he was playing in his rookie season, he decided not to do any interviews, and he kind of just thought it was very funny and just continued to do that. So no one really knows a whole lot about Sterling Sharpe, but yeah, look, played a long time ago. The one thing that stopped him from getting in all this time was the fact that he only played 7 seasons. But I mean, talk about, it's like a rock star. Some of these rock stars pass away. What's that famous age, 27, and they cram so much of what they do into that short period of time. Sterling Sharpe is kind of the rock star of his time. Just from a Packers perspective, I mean, the Packers were pretty poor since Vince Lombardi left. We had a pretty manky time in the 70s and 80s. So he was this shining light that came in, drafted in the first round. And every season that he played in the NFL, bar 2, and one of those was just shy, about 40 yards shy. He was over 1,000 yards. Now, this is a guy who's playing as well in the same time as Jerry Rice. So it's like the Ronaldo and Messi debate, isn't it? Really, like if you had Ronaldo or Messi playing on their own in any era, they would be head and shoulders above everybody else. But because they play with some of the greats, they kind of get lost in that. So he played 7 seasons. It's not unheard of that you can play 7 seasons and get into the Hall of Fame, but it just makes it tougher, doesn't it? I mean, you don't have your stats on tape. Not everyone remembers you. People think you don't deserve it. So yeah, it's delighted that he's in, and to end this big long diatribe because I'm Irish, you just have to ask me one question and set me loose, right? To end it on this was that Shannon was inducted before him. Shannon is the younger of the two brothers, had a longer career, obviously. And he said at his Hall of Fame speech, he spent most of it saying how great Sterling was and how Shannon, although he was inducted, is the second best football player in his family. So he was like, and it was funny looking at that video too, because Sterling was standing beside him in a very mustard coloured Hall of Fame looking jacket, but never sort of campaigned for himself to get in. So it doesn't always happen for people, So um, I know I said it end here, but there was a famous player, Jerry Kramer, offensive lineman, played back in Lombardi's time, and he only recently got in, well, kind of recently, into the Hall of Fame because his daughter, Alicia, had this massive campaign to get him in. So sometimes it gets past a certain time frame, and then you fall into the senior category, and then there's too many players there too. So it's a long time coming.
Yeah, Jerry Kramer got in 2018 after, I think it was 50 years after he retired. So, yeah, it does happen. And it's interesting, isn't it? It's a debate that probably exceeds mine and your conversation. But, what does a Hall of Fame class as? Is 7 great seasons enough? Is 4 great seasons enough? As you say, other than his rookie season, 961 yards was the fewest yards he got over 16 games, because there was less games back there as well. And in his last career, in 1994, got 18 touchdowns, which led the league. So, talk about going out on a high as well. If it wasn't for the neck injury, I mean, how far do you think he would have gone? Do you think he would have been talked about and revered as one of the best, if not the best, if he didn't have that injury?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, people that know the game say Jerry Rice and then Sterling Sharpe, and you might sort of go, and sometimes that does a disservice to Sterling Sharpe, because as you say, if you extrapolate his career over a longer period, he showed no signs of slowing down. And remember, this is when Green Bay are in their heyday. So 2 years after he retires, they win the Super Bowl. So, I don't see his career sort of falling off for a very long time. And then also the really painful part is just how durable he was, which is hard to say to someone who got done in by a neck injury, right? But that injury, and it was 2 loose vertebrae in the top of his neck. So if he got hit, he could die. But if you look at that tackle that kind of put him out, it's really innocuous. There's nothing in it. I mean, just type in, it's Grizzly to do, but it's on actually a Grizzly tackle, Sterling Sharpe injury, and you'll see it. So he played all 16 games in all of these regular season games from when he was drafted, including the postseason, which he only got 2 games to be involved in there. And he got over 100 yards per game. He was absolutely lights out. So it just shows he was durable until that neck injury. Played every game, over 1,000-yard career. Brett Favre's numbers, and Brett Favre is arguably in the Hall of Fame because of Sterling Sharpe, or for reasons to do with Sterling Sharpe, because he helped him out. Because Sterling Sharpe came in when we had a guy called Don Mikowski, the Magic Man, and he got I think he led the league in yards one year because of Sterling Sharpe. I mean, he just made everybody around him better as well. So you sort of look at the post-injury years of the Super Bowls and Brett Favre's career. There's no doubt in my mind that he goes down as one of the absolute greatest, but it's one of those things I guess we'll never know.
It sounds like you feel he is quite responsible for turning the Packers, sort of not the dark days, but the lower days of the Green Bay Packers, and really bringing in that era that we've seen ever since the early 90s.
He is part of it. I mean, look, it all comes down to firing Lindy Infante, getting Mike Holmgren in, Mike Holmgren trading for Brett Favre, Ron Wolf, and what he did with the team of coming into the locker room and telling everybody, all of these players that are here now are not guaranteed a space. I only want winners in this locker room. And it's that atmosphere that has maintained and stayed in Green Bay, because everybody who came after them took their philosophy and rolled with it. So he's not the sole reason, but he is a massive part of it, absolutely.
Packers now up to 29 Hall of Famers, only the Chicago Bears, who I imagine that's a little rivalry away from the game as well, of who can have the most, because I can't imagine many of the current Chicago Bears are going to be in. Maybe we'll never know what happens in the future for the likes of Caleb Williams, but the Packers obviously deep history with it, going back to 1963 with Lambeau, of course, Lambeau Field, the name of the stadium named after Curly. In the UK and Ireland, we revere players, in soccer and rugby and whatever it is, but we don't really have this Hall of Fame. I know the Premier League started one recently, but it is quite an American thing to do, and retiring of jerseys. I don't know. I guess, how do you first come across it, and does it hold that weight for you that it does over there in the States?
Yeah, I think so. Look, I founded UK Packers a long time ago. I spent all my time delving into the history of it. I've released, 100 podcasts on the history of it. So I think I've personally have a good appreciation for how far this thing goes back. But I mean, look, there's a guy called Vern Llewellyn. The thing is, and not to make a 10-minute answer to a short question, right? But I mean, the game has changed so much. So that's a complexity for me too. Do I like the Hall of Fame? Absolutely. Do I think it rewards people who were at the top of their game? I think it does, particularly now. But I mean, there's an awful lot of players who got overlooked. And there's an awful lot of players, like if you look at Sterling Sharpe, for instance, he got done in because he had 7 seasons, right? But nowadays, like he played in an era of the NFL where there was all these highlight reel videos on YouTube of lads getting their faces and heads ripped off, right? But because of CTE and the sensitivities around that, that's a big taboo now, and the rules have come in. So if you look at Sterling Sharpe, what could he have done in today's NFL? So if you look at older players, Vern Llewellyn being one of them, where a game would be soccer scores. I mean, they'd end 3-0 or 7-6, you know what I mean? And the most exciting thing that could happen would be a field goal, because it was a game of attrition. It was a ground game mostly with running. The most important person on your squad might have been your punter. So it's just that he was able to punt the ball away, get them far enough down the field to stop them advancing, and he was the main top player. So I think it has an awful lot of merit, but it definitely isn't a perfect system. And we saw that with who we spoke about, Jerry Kramer, the offensive lineman, right? He was so good that he made all of the all-decade teams from the 1960s and all the way up. And anytime anyone did the top 100 players in the NFL or the top O-lineman ever to play, he was always on the list. And when you told people he wasn't in the Hall of Fame, they were as shocked as you were by telling them he's not. They're like, really? Are you sure? And they'd have to Google it because they think he was in there. So some people, unfortunately, get overlooked. It's a very good thing to do, but we've seen with Sterling Sharpe that it's flawed, right? Because you can have a player that comes in, they don't get off to a fast start. They're a so-so player for 2 years. They come into their own for 6 seasons. Then they hang around the NFL for another 3-4 years. People still know who they are. Clay Matthews is a perfect example-ish, where you recognize the long hair, the aggressive attitude, but his career had fallen off the last couple of years, and particularly when he went to the Rams. But his sort of, his reputation preceded him. So you'd think he was just in the NFL for forever. But if you boil down his Hall of Fame worthy, career, how many years did he actually have? And the opposite is true. Tom Brady, you could make 3 quarterbacks from one Tom Brady career, and all 3 of them quarterbacks would make the Hall of Fame, right? So it's not sort of a perfect system, but it's good. Would I visit the Hall of Fame and go in and ogle at all of the statues? Probably not. We go over to Lambeau every year, and I like going into the Packers Hall of Fame. But I think it's a worthy exercise.
Yeah, Canton, Ohio as well. You're not going to just stumble across there unless you're deliberately going to the Hall of Fame. So, yeah, totally get what you mean. And just because you mentioned punters there, it's something that hopefully on the HuddleUK podcast we've lined up for in a couple of weeks' time. We need to finalise the details. But both the punter and the kicker currently for the Packers are from Dublin or Wicklow. And there's just something I find quite staggering about the fact that, their entire roster is from the US, and then both the players are involved in kicking are from this tiny circle you can draw around the south of Dublin in Ireland. It must be great for you, being from County Wicklow and supporting the Packers, to have 2 basically locals on the roster this offseason.
Well, I feel like I missed out. I was from Wicklow. I didn't know we could do that. I didn't know that was a career option for me. I would have put it down in my leaving cert points when I was going for it. Yeah, just to be clear, is that Brandon McManus is the kicker, so it's the international lad that's after coming in to sort of sit behind him, right? Because you get an extra spot. But yeah, Dan Whelan, and he's a weapon. He's an absolute weapon. But it makes sense. It doesn't make sense when you think about it at a high level. But when you come down, I mean, for people that aren't familiar, we have amateur sports, which is actually the biggest sport on this island, which is Gaelic football and hurling. And on all that sport is like Aussie rules, if people know that better. You're catching the ball, kicking the ball high. So you've got good hand skills, kicking skills as well. Like you're trying to aim that ball over, would you believe, is like a touchdown style goalposts, So, I mean, there's pedigree there. But, I mean, it's a credit to the Leader Academy, where these lads are churning out these kickers, because not only do we have Gaelic football, which does that, we have rugby, as you know well, being in the UK, where these lads are, expert at any angle. So It makes sense, but really bizarre when you think about it, that the chances of you playing for the Packers is immeasurably higher if you're from the Wicklow or Dublin region. It's pretty crazy. Like,
Yeah, sorry, yeah, you're absolutely right. Not the first choice kicker at the moment, but it's Mark McNamee, isn't it?
me, yeah.
Yeah, who's the other one too. But it's great to have the Irish guys there, and obviously being a UK NFL podcast and website, we love to see the local guys getting in. So that's great. Hopefully, players that we'll be speaking to. Just to move it on from the Hall of Fame to the current crop, I've spoken on this podcast in the past about the Green Bay Packers wide receiver room and how, in my opinion, it's just a lot of wide receiver twos. Too many wide receiver twos. There's tons of them. Matthew Golden is the first round pick this year. I know myself and Nathan, who's the Packers writer for our website, fiercely disagree on this topic. I think he's a good wide receiver. He thinks he's great. Where do you land on Matthew Golden and the group as a whole at the moment? Do you think any of them can ever hit the heights? Probably not of Sterling Sharpe, but hit the heights and have the longevity of a career that might be a Hall of Famer at some point down the line.
Yeah, let's not lose the run of ourselves here, right, with Hall of Fame. But yes, I think they can. No, look, there's promise there. I mean, Sterling Sharpe is a first round pick. Matthew Golden's a first round pick. He has ridiculous straight line speed. Does that translate into football speed? We don't know until we see him out there. We all know college and the NFL is a different beast. It's so much faster. And typically, as much as we have high hopes, and you'd expect if you're a first round pick, you make that instant impact, right? But we can't be too naive about it either, that he's going to have to learn the system and all that kind of stuff. I mean, part of the conversation here is Jordan Love too. People said he regressed last year. His stats were down, but he got injured in week 1. So let's sort of remember that too. So if he comes back and manages to stay healthy, your O-line looks exceptional as well, because we're moving Elton Jenkins to centre. And from what we hear in training camp, it looks really good. But Matthew Golden, I know, gets the headlines. But Jaden Reed, as you said, I mean, he's an absolutely fantastic player. He is the de facto number 1, really, in my mind. Christian Watson was right up there with his unbelievable speed. Romeo Dobbs is another guy that people sleep on as well. He's right up there in the stats. When you look at his receiving yards, I think if he gets a 1,000-yard season this season, probably won't. But if he was to do it, he'd be in the top 20 of Packers receivers on the all-time list. So, and really, really sure hands. It was a mixture of Jordan Love getting injured and the Packers dropping a lot of stuff last season. And then Savion Williams, remember, now he went out with a concussion during training camp, which isn't great, but he's another speed merchant. So we have an awful lot of amazing receiving threats as a classical wide receiver, but our tight ends as well. Luke Musgrave, Tucker Kraft, absolutely fantastic. Josh Jacobs in at running back. So my problem with the whole wide receiver thing is we've so many mouths to feed. And I post about it all the time from the UK Packers account and say, like, we are absolutely stacked. This is the deepest roster on offense and defense that I've seen for decades. And I always get told, hold your horses here. These lads are unproven. But they've been the youngest NFL team for the last 2 years, and they have 2 years experience being that. They're still young. They've all their career ahead of them. Matthew Golden, I think, will be a superstar this season. There's already stories of him catching 60-yard bombs in training camp. It is training camp with little contact. I say little contact because we do have a guy, Nate Hobbs from the Raiders, who seems to be putting lads on their backsides in camp and needs to be pulled aside and told, stop doing that, ball boy. But yeah, look, we're so fast at wide receiver. I think I'm just daring the NFC North and the NFL in general to stop us.
How do you think they shape up in the NFC North this season? Because it was a really, really fiercely competitive division last year. Obviously, the Lions are in the best form they've arguably ever been in. The Vikings were sort of the surprise package, maybe, with Sam Darnold last year. Most people didn't expect that. I mean, the wheels fell off at the end, but most people didn't see that coming. And as you say, Jordan Love, there was a lot of talk about him regressing. I've already mentioned Nathan, who's our Packers writer, but he's written a full-length piece on the HuddleUK website, basically arguing that he didn't really regress that much. It was just, circumstances and the drops, which you've already alluded to. So, yeah, how do you think the Packers fare in the division going into 2025?
Look, if we were looking at last season, it's tough, right? Now, I think we have got, it's like the Premier League. I mean, if you haven't got better, you've got worse. So I think the Packers have added pieces both on defense. Now, we've lost Jair Alexander, but we didn't really have him anyway because he was injured. So we've added pieces on defense. So we should be better there, and we should be better on offense. Jordan Love isn't injured as of now, so we should be better in that regard as well. And he hasn't thrown a pass yet, so the receivers cannot yet drop it. So we're already ahead in that area as well. I look at the Lions and I think it's more sits with the other teams, right? Even Sam Darnold's mother was probably surprised that he did so well. And I tried to sort of pick apart their performance during our sort of weekly, bi-weekly podcast throughout the season and sort of saying, like, this cannot continue. The stats just don't make sense. But he continued right up until, as you said, the very end, until the wheels fell off. I mean, his stats were absolutely legit. So they are a real contender. The Lions, I'm used to the Lions and the Lions fans wearing paper bags on their head with SOL, same old Lions written on it. But they have gotten better. I hated Dan Campbell. I thought he was a caveman. I hated the way he was talking about biting kneecaps and drinking triple, quadruple espressos. But I've grown to actually really respect and like the guy because he runs an absolutely fantastic squad. I mean, there's no two ways about it. Very well coached teams. To say that he's so aggressive, I don't think the Lions are a particularly nasty team. I think they play within the bounds of where they should, and they deserve to be where they have been, the last couple of years under him. His problem will be is that, was it him all along, or can he handle the burden of his offensive and defensive coordinators leaving? And if that's not the case, that's where I think they fall off. Also, they've had some key injuries already, unfortunately for them. So I would see the Packers, if they're healthy, making a resurgence in it and definitely being going for the top spot. But as you said, I mean, I like to take the mick out of the Chicago Bears because I'm a Packers fan. Why not, right? And when you were talking about the Hall of Famers and all those lads in, I was going to say, yeah, well, you go back to the 1920s, that's where they got most of their purchase, and the 80s, and until then, they've been pretty rubbish, right? And that's sort of, there's science behind that. Look it up. But with Caleb Williams, I sort of put people on notice last year. He should have been an awful lot better than he was, but I think the Bears are really, really good at taking good quarterbacks and destroying them. But I've seen some highlights from training camp. I've been kind of taking a sideways glance at some Bears. My algorithm's all messed up at some Bears accounts on social media, and the guy is a generational talent. Now, whether he will actually work out, I don't know. And you look at Trevor Lawrence for the Jags. I mean, this was a guy who's supposed to come in and absolutely destroy the competition, and it hasn't happened for him because you need that supporting cast. But the Bears could be the Vikings of last year, and they could take us by surprise, to be honest. I've got my Packers shareholders are behind me, so obviously Packers are number one. That's all I'll say. That's where I'm going to end that. That's the analysis there.
I was just about to make you put your money where your mouth is, and shareholder, literally your money where your mouth is. So you're saying the Packers for the division, you fancy yourselves to win it this year?
I do, yeah. Look, and I can be biased and sort of say, like, oh, it's because I'm a Packers fan, but we've an awful lot of weapons there on offense and defense. Josh Jacobs is coming back. Marshawn Lloyd, who's a guy we didn't see last year, he's a backup running back because he kept getting injured. Now, again, he's got an injury again because Nate Hobbs, who I mentioned earlier, put him on his bum and he injured his hamstring. But if he's not out for the long term, we just have so much depth, and barring an injury to Jordan Love. But again, Jordan Love went out last year, and we had a guy in, Malik Willis, who was in the building for about a week and a half. He'd only just about put his laced up his boots, and he come on and start winning games for them. So even at backup quarterback, I think we're doing fairly well. But look, it's Jeff Hafley's second year. I'd all pivots on that, I think. Can he come in and can he improve the defense, which he did first year round. So the lads are saying they're coming in, they're reading the same playbook, they're getting comfortable with the plays. It's all if it translates to the field, right? So, I mean, we won the off-season. We're absolute Super Bowl champions in the off-season, but whether that translates to the season, God only knows.
Yeah, I feel like there's a Chargers fan. We're always off-season Super Bowl champions.
Oh, yeah, 100%. You win it, yeah.
Oh, that and the schedule release, we smash those days. Steve, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. If you're a Packers fan listening, I'm sure you already do follow the UK and Ireland Packers over on Twitter. I'd be very surprised if you don't, but it's at UK Packers. Make sure you go follow some 14,000 followers. I think you said as well at the start, the biggest UK and Ireland fan group of any team in the NFL. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, well, the biggest organic one that we don't have a big office behind us. Yeah, and I mean, look, we go over to Green Bay every year on trips. We do podcasts twice a week, meetups, and all that kind of jazz. And we actually had the Packers come over and do 2 documentaries on us, which was surreal. Walking around the towns of Wicklow, and people thinking I had notions with these cameras in my face. I was famous for about 1.5 minutes. It was great.
And you can see one of those. I know one of those is the pinned tweet on your profile as well. So make sure to go check that out. Steve, it's been a pleasure. There are 2 more Hall of Famers, this week that we need to talk about, the 2 Allens, and we're going to get into those right now. Well, the third Hall of Fame player we want to talk about being inducted this week is a Minnesota Viking. And of course, we've got to get the Vikings view from over in Minneapolis as well. So joining us is digital sports reporter for Fox 9, Jeff Wald. Jeff, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Yeah, very well. Of course, the player, the Vikings player, who played for many teams, but the player who is going into the Hall of Fame as a Viking is Jared Allen, a notorious player who hunted down the quarterback, sacks everywhere you were looking. Draft pick back in 2004 and a fourth round draft pick at that. Tell us a little bit about him as a player for those who never got to watch him play. Just a fierce competitor.
I think you hit it on the head there. I mean, like you said, he was drafted to the Kansas City Chiefs in 2004. He spent 4 years in Kansas City, had some issues off the field that he needed to address, and the team kind of, they kind of met both ways on that, and he was seeking a trade. And along came the Vikings in 2008 before the start of that season, and they showed that they wanted him. It was quite the trade for multiple draft picks. I believe it was multiple first round picks or multiple high round picks to get him. And he spent the better part of 6 seasons in Minnesota, and he made 96 starts. He had he had a bunch of sacks. He had he was just an impact player as an edge rusher. He was a defensive end. He's sort of like, I kind of laugh now that we call edge rushers and defensive ends outside linebackers in today's NFL, because he was sort of that before that became a thing. I mean, really what it boils down to is the scheme of the defense, but he really is an edge rusher, defensive end. And we love him here because he was able to get to the quarterback pretty much at will. And when he did sack the quarterback, you saw the legendary calf rope celebration. Like, he tracked him down and zipped him up and brought him to the ground. And that, Vikings fans loved it.
Yeah, as you say, a first round pick and two third round picks. They really went after him. And when he signed the 6 year deal with the Vikings, it was the highest paid defensive player contract at the time, of course. Money nowadays in the NFL is crazy. I've seen some offensive linemen getting what I would call quarterback money nowadays. But yeah, the numbers, just to rattle off a few of them, when you hear them, you understand why he's a player going into the Hall of Fame. 14 and a half sacks in each of his first two seasons for Minnesota. And then it was the 2011 season where he got 22 sacks, which is still a franchise record. Also, interestingly, didn't know this until I was doing a bit of research on him, has the most safeties of any player in NFL history, or tied with four. Just a very bizarre stat. I know that you spoke to him a couple of years ago when he was inducted into the Vikings Ring of Honor. Off the field, what's he like as a character? Because I've seen some videos of him on social media, like surfing. He looks like he's loving retirement.
Oh yeah, I mean, he was a guy that always told it like it was. He wasn't afraid to tell the truth. Obviously, within the parameters of a team locker, you're not gonna, if one of your teammates is underperforming, you're not gonna throw him under the bus to the media, stuff like that. But he was always he's always been a very genuine dude. He always tells it like it is. He always is able to articulate what he's feeling and when things need to get better and when they're going well. To your point, he had 22 sacks in 2011. The team selected him to go to the Ring of Honor a couple of years ago, and in true Jared Allen fashion, he comes out during a halftime ceremony riding a horse. He's got full blown cowboy hat on and everything. So he is a cowboy at heart. And the funniest part, last year when the Hall of Fame committees went around to the different players who were going to be selected, and delivered the announcement, Steve Hutchinson, a former Vikings legendary offensive lineman, did the announcement for Jared Allen, or did the honor letting him know he was going in, knocked on his door, and they had a conversation in Jared Allen's kitchen. And he goes, a little notice would have been nice. I was literally out in my chicken coop 20 minutes ago. So he had no idea what was going on. And when he sees Steve Hutchinson at his doorstep with his gold jacket on for the Hall of Fame, he goes, "Oh, I guess it's my turn." And so that kind of tells you the person and player he is. He was sort of humbled by the honor, as every NFL player is. I mean, that's, aside from winning a Super Bowl, your goal in the NFL is to win a gold jacket and to go to the Hall of Fame. And he'll get to do that this week. And it's absolutely insane to me to think that there's a football game happening tomorrow night. On top of that, but quite the honor for Jared Allen. Yeah, like he said, I did get a chance to speak with him a little bit last year at the team facility. Really genuine dude, really good guy. He was a fan favorite, and it was easy to see why after spending about 5 to 10 minutes with him.
Over here in the UK, we don't really do Hall of Fame. It's not a construct in most sports. You have fans revered and sometimes jerseys retired, but the concept of the Hall of Fame is a very, very American thing. And I think a lot of British fans might not necessarily understand the stature that it holds. But as you were just saying, then after winning a Super Bowl, getting the gold jackets is sort of like the next aim for some of these players, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's mostly, if you're going to the Hall of Fame, it's likely because you've won a championship or two. In Allen's case, obviously that didn't happen with the Vikings, but It's more so that your ability to rack up, consistently put up numbers season to season. And to your point, you said, 15 and a half sacks in 2007. He had 14 and a half, 2 years consecutive after that, 22 in 2011. This guy made it a habit and a character, just a consistent stat of his to get after the quarterback, get him to the ground and wreak havoc on defense. And he was, I think, a good word for me to describe Jared Allen is relentless. Didn't matter whether it was, middle of the second quarter or 2 minutes to go in the fourth quarter needing a play. He seemed to just have the energy to somehow find a way to get it done. And there's not a lot of guys that can say that. I mean, he was just absolutely relentless. He was a major problem for, the left and right tackles, depending on what side he lined up on. And he was well respected by his peers. That's the thing with the Hall of Fame is this is a group that, peers select you to get in. It's a group of voters that select you. It's not just handed to you. You're like, obviously you have to earn your status, you have to earn your numbers, but it's a group of people that select these guys to go in based on their legendary careers, and that's quite the honor for him.
Are you surprised in any way that it's taken 5 years for Jared Allen to be, called up to this honor?
Maybe a little bit. I mean, the numbers don't lie, but to your point, it does take some clout to get there, and some other guys maybe had to get their turn first before it's his. The fact that he didn't win a Super Bowl with the Vikings, that might have had something to do with it, but I think it's mostly just a product of other guys getting their chance to get in, making sure that you're doing right by certain other players and their careers. I don't know that Jared Allen would try to validate his career by going to the Hall of Fame. I think it's just sort of a nice cherry on top of the sundae, if you will. I know he cherished his time with the Vikings. He cherished his time in the NFL. He grew every year as a man and as a player. And I think that's all you can ask for. And if you get the accolades like this, even better.
Yeah, well, 136 sacks in 187 regular season games, and another 641 tackles on top of that. A true great player. I just wanted, before I let you go, just to talk quickly about the Vikings, because I know there's a season coming up. Jared Allen obviously retired a few years ago. You've been involved. I know you get access to the team as well. What's the vibes been like in training camp? Have you seen any of the rookies flashing, or are there any players that have caught your eye this off season?
This might be in my 8 years roughly being around this team and covering this team. This might be the most anticipated season I've seen in the last since I really started journalistically covering this team. I mean, it's largely based around the quarterback. You've got Sam Darnold, the left in free agency, and he's now with a different team. And then you had Kirk Cousins before that did his thing here for 6 years. Everybody loved what he did. He was the only knock on him was his inability to win playoff games, things of that nature. Sam Darnold spent his 1 year here, and now you have the first round pick from last year, JJ McCarthy. We saw his potential a little bit in his preseason debut last year against the Las Vegas Raiders. He threw for 188 yards and two pretty dynamic touchdowns. Granted, it's a preseason game, doesn't mean anything. We come to find out a few days later, he tears the meniscus in his right knee, and it was a complete repair, so he was out for the entire year. So the first, the Monday night game coming up here in about a month in Chicago will be his first official NFL regular season snap, and all eyes are on him at every training camp practice. I know on Monday when they had the first day in pads, he threw a 60-yard touchdown to Jordan Addison. So that kind of gives you a glimpse of what we think we're dealing with here. If you can get this, an average to above average season out of JJ McCarthy in his rookie year, I think this team is looking at big things because they've done all kinds of things to retool defense. They've spent a lot of money there. They've added Rondale Moore. They've added Jordan Mason on offense. Some more weapons, and we're also awaiting health. Justin Jefferson to get healthy. He tweaked his hamstring a little bit in practice last week. He has not been back since last Thursday. I want to say he missed the back half of practice, but everybody's saying the right things around there. He's going to be fine. He'll be ready. I think there's a lot of excitement around this team this year because I think people think if everybody stays healthy, they're capable of big things.
Yeah, you mentioned the first game of the season, a primetime game against the divisional rivals in the Bears. That's really going to be a tester for JJ McCarthy because we saw the talent as well at Michigan. So there's no denying he's a good quarterback, but we haven't seen it yet, have we, on an NFL field?
100%. And another wrinkle there is JJ McCarthy is actually from that area. He's from near the Chicago area. And there were some whispers in the last couple of weeks that the Bears were thinking about moving up to take him number 1 overall last year when they took Caleb Williams. So, I mean, he's got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. Like, to your point, he was a collegiate national champion. The guy knows what it takes to win at a high level. I mean, he just hasn't done it at the NFL yet. So we are all very curious to see how he responds when the bright lights are on Monday Night Football on the national stage, because it's not that stage. The national spotlight is not something he's been shying away from at all ever in his life. So just curious to see how he responds at the NFL level.
And what about the rookies that were drafted this year? It was Donovan Jackson from Ohio State in the first round. It was the sort of a point of need, wasn't it? That offensive line after some struggles last year. Have you seen much of him in training camp? And I'll get the name Ty Felton as well is the wide receiver they drafted as well. Have they been making any moves for themselves?
I haven't heard a ton about Ty Felton. He's a speedy, athletic wide receiver out of Maryland. He can make plays when given the right opportunity. It's interesting that you mentioned Donovan Jackson, because he has made a few splashes in training camp. He's going to be competing for one of those starting offensive line spots after the Vikings retooled the line a little bit after last year, because the biggest need there was to get more physical. You had Garrett Bradbury got released, and then he eventually signed, I think, with the Patriots. They traded Ed Ingram, who was a second-round pick a few years ago, and that's kind of, from a front office perspective, that's a little bit glaring when you're getting rid of guys that were former first and second round picks because they weren't the right fit. You bring in a Ryan Kelly from the Indianapolis Colts to play center, and then you bring in Will Fries, a teammate of his with Indianapolis, to add some physicality. And basically Donovan Jackson is he's competing with Blake Brendel for the starting guard spot. And I think the Vikings want to give him every opportunity to win that job. It's just a matter of if he's ready. I've heard he's physical, but he's still raw. He's still a rookie. He still has some things to clean up. So that'll be one of the interesting battles as camp continues here.
And just finally, we started by talking about the Hall of Fame. One of the Vikings player who's back for next season is Harrison Smith, obviously drafted way back in 2012 in the first round. He's the sort of player, maybe not necessarily will get into the NFL Hall of Fame, but he's back for what might be one last ride this season and will be a player, in no time who's in that Vikings Ring of Honor.
I mean, you want to talk about one of the most respected players in that locker room, it's Harrison Smith. I mean, that guy has done nothing but be a leader since the day he stepped foot in Minnesota. We sort of all thought last year, just based on his demeanor and his body language after the playoff loss, we thought he was done because he got emotional talking about his teammates. And, you never know how many chances you're going to get when you get to the playoffs. You don't know when it's going to come again. The secondary itself has been a little bit retooled again this year with Cam Bynum departing in free agency. But to your point, I think Harrison Smith and Kevin O'Connell give each other a few jabs about their age, because I think O'Connell just turned 40, or maybe he's in the last year in his 30s. And Harrison Smith now been in the league over a decade, at 12th season, all with the same team. When you think about how NFL, the business side of the league works, it's very rare for a player to spend his entire career with one team and have it be over a decade. And like you said, I would expect nothing less than the second he's eligible, he'll be in the Vikings Ring of Honor for sure. That's not in doubt. It's just a matter of if and when he's selected to the Hall of Fame, because that dude has been wreaking havoc on offenses for several years, and he's done the right things to keep his body in shape to do so at his age. That's the other thing. So I'm really curious to see what he'll provide the defense this year.
Yeah, maybe another Viking in a few years that will be in the Hall of Fame. Jeff, thank you very much for taking the time to chat to us. Jeff, you can go find over on X at JeffWaldFox9. Been a pleasure chatting to you. That was Jared Allen. We got one more to go. Another Allen, of course. This time it's going to be with the Eagles, though, and a returning guest on the HuddleUK podcast, Scott Grayson. Well, the final Hall of Fame player being inducted this week is the second Allen of the group of four. Eric Allen, former Eagles, Saints as well, and the Raiders, of course. But the Eagles are the team he's been inducted into the Hall of Fame. So we've got a returning guest, as I just mentioned. Scott Grayson is joining us from Fox, from Philly, who previewed the Super Bowl for us. It was a good time for the Eagles back in February, wasn't it?
Oh, it was a great time. Yeah, everybody enjoyed the party. The parade was a lot of fun. They're definitely back at work already, looking to build on it and try to defend their title.
And then you, just before we get into Eric Allen, you fancied them to win. You said on this podcast you thought that they were the better team. It kind of went how you called.
Yeah, I was, well, I don't think anybody saw that kind of a blowout coming. I mean, the defense really set the tone, and then, the offense was the ones that kind of provide the dagger and slammed the door shut on the Chiefs. And look, they meet again in week 2. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to see what happens in that one too.
Yeah, I'm sure that both teams will be fired up for that one. Let's get on to the meat and bones of why we're here, though, today. Eric Allen, the fourth Hall of Famer, being inducted this week, that we're talking about today. A player who had many good seasons, the one particularly in 1993, you were just saying before we went live. It's a player that you were watching when you were a bit younger, that you enjoyed watching. What are your memories of watching Eric Allen as a player, and, just how solid he was in the secondary for Eagles and for the Saints and Raiders later in his career?
Yeah, he was having his prime when I was, a teenager, really getting into what football was and what the Eagles were about, and they were a great defensive team back then. He had a lot of great parts around him, but what I remember most about Eric Allen was his size, his reach, his length. He was tough on receivers because of that. He could really cover a lot of ground with his arms and the space that he had around him. And what I also remember was, I was thinking about it before I was talking to you. I don't remember him really dropping any interceptions. He had great hands. And then what he would do is after the catch, he was lethal. I mean, he had a bunch of touchdowns that he would return off of interceptions. So once he got the ball, it wasn't just the interception; it was what he could do with it after the ball too. And he was just an all around special player. His speed, his agility, again, his hands, his ability to cover a guy and really make it tough on them as a receiver. That's what I enjoyed watching about him. And he was so exciting because, like I said, once he did catch the ball, you didn't know what he was going to do with it after. So I just remember him. He was a special player. A lot of people around here in Philly really feel like this was a way overdue honor for him. And they thought he should have been in sooner. And, I agree. I thought he was a really special player on a team that had a lot of special players on defense. And that was something he benefited from for sure.
Yeah, it's funny that it's been the common theme of all 4 chats we've had on this podcast is that all the players, the vibe is that they should have been in earlier. Even Antonio Gates, who's getting in at the second opportunity. People saying, "Oh, I can't believe he wasn't in at the first opportunity." And I mentioned the 1993 season at the top, and you were saying how good he was at returning interceptions, 6 interceptions, 4 of which were pick sixes, including a 94-yard one. I'm sure you've seen it. If you're listening to this and you've never seen it, you have to go look it up. But the pick six 94-yard return, I think for me is the best pick six in NFL history. I can't think of anything that's better than that. Just all round, the amount of players he makes miss. As a defensive player, you'd expect to see this from the best offensive players in the world. It's quite the highlight, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was an amazing play. And that's what I meant. Like the way that he could read tacklers, almost like makes you think they should have used him on offense a little bit too. I mean, he was so good with being able to make guys miss. That's what I mean about the danger that he had when he would pick a ball off. And his teammates knew it too. Like they knew, oh, Eric's got the ball. We've got to go block. Like, it's not like, oh, he got the ball. Great. We can go get off the field now. No, it's this has a chance to go. Every time he would pick one off, it would have a chance to go. And I just think that kind of ability was just so special. I mean, and the speed, like we talk all the time about, in the league these days, a running back may be able to break free, but does he actually hit the home run or does he get brought down at the 10 or the 20? And Eric had the ability to not only get the ball, get around guys, make the miss, but then he could take it all the way and not slow down. And I think there's a lot of those aspects of his game that I think sometimes get overlooked. He was a special, special player.
And obviously the Eagles is the team that he sort of tied himself to, but I think it says a lot about him as a player and as a character that in his 12th season, his penultimate season with what was the Oakland Raiders, he still had 6 interceptions for 145 returning yards and 3 pick sixes. I don't know how old he would have been in the year 2000. Looking at him now, 35. I mean, that's a ridiculous statistics for someone who's in their mid-30s.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about when I didn't play football that long, right? But my knees, and I'm not too much older than that. They hurt. It's like to go around and to be able to do what he was doing, having to shadow receivers, break on a dime, stay with them. I mean, I'm just thinking what he had to deal with his knees to be able to do that was amazing. But you're right. I mean, he was good all the way to the end. He was good all the way to the end, even after he left Philadelphia, like you pointed out. I remember him with the Saints too. He had a great career, and if he didn't go as an Eagle, I know there'd be a lot of people around this part that would be pretty upset with him. But yeah, he had most of his career here. It's really where he made himself. But it was good to see him still be more of what he could be after he left here, because the Eagles did kind of at that time start, really trading away and selling off and not re-signing some of their better players on that defense. It was kind of the beginning of one of their really downfalls before they were able to build back up into a Super Bowl contender. But it's a shame he and a lot of guys on that defense never won a Super Bowl. Buddy Ryan was the head coach back then at the time too, and that's why they were very, very good defensively, and they just couldn't quite get over the hump with their offense to kind of get through and get to that promised land.
Obviously, he retired in 2001, or at the end of the 2001 season. You mentioned he didn't win a Super Bowl. How big a factor? I don't think you can quantify it or put a number on it, but how big a factor in terms of getting into the Hall of Fame, first ballot straight away, does winning a Super Bowl do? Because I think that's the only knock against Antonio Gates and a lot of the players we've mentioned on this podcast already, not Super Bowl winners. And that seems to be the crux of it. If you are a multiple time Super Bowl winner and you have the numbers to back it up, you seem far more likely to get in at the first opportunity.
I think it's a great point, and it's a good question that I think goes to a lot of the people who have the ability to vote for that. Right? How important is that? I think it is important. I mean, you need to be a winner. Usually, if you're good, you end up in a Hall of Famer. You should be good enough to win, but it takes more than one guy to do it. And I don't think you can penalize some of these talented players. If the eye test tells you these guys are special, they have the ability, then why does it matter whether or not they won a Super Bowl? Because it takes 22 guys to do it on the field, and it takes more than that when you consider guys coming on and off. So one guy, I don't think you should penalize somebody for not winning one. Does it help get you in sooner? I think it probably does. And if you've won more than one, does it help even more? Yes. It shows that you really had a lot around you. You had the ability to go out and win them. I think getting to them helps, even if you don't win it. And it does help to even say that you were the best in your conference and you got to the big game, but really winning them, it does. Because it does. It's something they look at. You hear all the time. What are the accolades? All pro, right? Super Bowl winner. Those are all thrown in there. And you're right, in this class, there's several guys who can't add that last thing to it. It's really an interesting study as to how important it is, because that is a team prize, not an all pro. Things like that or named to Pro Bowls. How many times does that? That's an individual honor. So it's funny how the team one could also cause some players not to get in, which I think is a crime. That should not be, maybe that's a tiebreaker if it's between three different guys at the same position. Okay, did one of them win a Super? Okay, fine. Give him that this year, and we'll go back and revisit the other guys next year. It's an interesting study, and I think it's a great point on your part. How much does it matter? I don't think it should matter as much as it does, but it certainly does matter.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. I mean, one of my favorite players that when I started watching was Luke Kuechly, and he was snubbed this year from being a first ballot. And a lot of the people were like, well, he didn't win a Super Bowl. I was like, yeah, but he was the best player on the park every single game you watched him. So, there's not just him. There are countless examples of players. He was just the first one that came to mind for that. Just the last one on Eric Allen as well. I know that you were covering the Eagles when he was playing for the Eagles, but I was watching the video of when there was a knock on the door to tell him he was getting into the Hall of Fame, and he had all of his kids and opening the jacket. He just seems like such a likable character as well, and not, ignoring all of the on-field talent. As a bloke, he just seems like the sort of guy I'd like to go down the pub and have a beer with.
Oh yeah, he is a very likable guy. He's very approachable around the Philadelphia area whenever he's back. He appreciates what he did here, and he appreciates the people who supported him when he did it. And so yeah, that is him. And what you mentioned, and one of the things I really love is the knock on the door. These guys love when they know they're that close, they're hanging on every sound. And when they get that knock on the door, they're hoping it's that knock. I've talked to several guys who've been waiting for the Hall of Fame before, and that is one thing that they love. It kills them though while they're waiting for it, but when they finally get it, and you mentioned Eric in that case, they have their family. Like, it is one of the things I think the NFL really does well in that moment to show these guys the appreciation they deserve for what they did for the game to help, build it into what it is today. And Eric Allen Allen certainly deserves that. He is a very approachable guy, as I said before. And yeah, what you see is what you get with him. He's genuine. So, I think he's going to give a great Hall of Fame speech. I think he's going to, it's going to be very passionate, as most of them are. But what you see and what you hear is real Eric Allen. And I think everybody should hang on to that, what he has to say.
Yeah, well said. Couldn't agree more. I feel like I was agreeing with everything when you were on last time as well. We couldn't get you on without talking about the Eagles as well, just as away from Eric Allen and the Hall of Fame. One of the most viral clips we've had on this podcast, even since it started, was the episode with you where you were talking about the tush push, and me and you were basically saying how we like it and it should stay. It is staying, at least for now. What was that like covering sort of the vote on your end? And I bet the reception of the Eagles camp was not necessarily celebration because they can't celebrate, but they've got to be pleased it's still a thing this season.
It's amazing what they did. The owner went in, he brought Jason Kelsey, who is since retired, probably a future Hall of Famer, should be, to the meeting. And he was basically trying to snuff out some of the things that were put out that were not true about him complaining about it and the injuries that the toll it took on him. And he said that no, whatever said that wasn't true. And he dispelled those rumors, and they got enough votes to keep it in. So the Eagles were fighting for this. And you're right. You and I shared that opinion that it should stay in. Here's my opinion. I don't think that play should get taken out until teams are able to do it. More than a handful of teams are able to do it at the same success rate. Then it's like, okay, wait, what are we doing here? Because it's not stopping. Nobody's able to stop it. And now more and more teams are doing it. When you have one team that can do it well, why should you penalize one team for doing something so well that others can't? If they don't like it, stop it. Or start doing it themselves at a higher rate. And then eventually, then I would be in more support of getting a play like that banned. But right now, it's still in, as you said. The Eagles are going to use it. They're going to probably try some variations off of it because they don't want it to go away. And if they can show that they can run different parts of the same, that make a passing play out of it like they tried to do once or twice last year, I think they're going to do variations off of it to show that it can be built upon and become more of a formation that can be built out of into more plays. So it'll be fun to watch.
Yeah, one of the other interesting lines from this Eagles off season, I think it was last week, it might be in this week, or my days are blending into one. But it was Jordan Mailata who was up at one of the press conferences, I assume, after a day of training, and someone was asking him a question. One of the reporters, I don't know if it was yourself, but described the Eagles as defending champions. I'm sure you've seen this, and he's like,
Yes.
"We're not defending," and then used an expletive that I'm not going to say. I think his exact quote was, "I don't like hearing we're defending champions. We're not defending. We've won the title. We've got to go do it again, prove it all over again. That's our mentality." And I'm not an Eagles fan, but if I'm hearing that as an Eagles fan, I love that. That's exactly what you want to hear from your guys.
Yeah, the head coach Nick Sirianni went through the offseason talking to people who've won Super Bowls and what did you do to try to get back, especially coaches and other players and people who've won championships, and what did you do to get back? How did you get back? And they said you basically have to bury the last season. It's over. If you go into the new season thinking you've accomplished something already, you're behind the other teams because they're all hunting what you had. You don't have it now this year. So the mentality these guys are going in with, Jordan Mailata said it, that's their approach. They won. They had their ring ceremony where they got their rings and the dinner where they got them all. And I'm sure you saw some of that video. These guys had fun that night. They were putting them on. They were showing them off. Jalen Hurts never put his on, and he has left it off to the side. The focus is now on trying to get another one and going through that journey again because they had fun doing it. They enjoyed it. And now it's begun again. So they've really kind of closed that chapter. And this is another chapter now that they're working on in their books, right? That says you haven't done anything yet. This season, the 2025 season, they haven't done anything yet. And that's their mentality. And Jordan Mailata, I thought, said it well that day. But yeah, they don't want to hear about defending champs. They're not worried about that. They're trying to just win it again.
Well, hopefully for the Eagles fans and for yourself, it will be another good year. I think they're going to be, well, they are. There's no thinking about it. They are going to be one of the teams to stop in the league this year. I wouldn't bet against them making it to another Super Bowl. Scott, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to every guest who's been part of this. We're just going to round up and talk about the game itself. We're doing the first game of football in, I think, 171 days, albeit a Hall of Fame game. But let's just get into the nitty-gritty of it before we finish this episode. Well, just to round things off, we have to talk about the game itself. We've covered the 4 players being inducted into the Hall of Fame, but it is the Chargers against the Lions, the first game of football in 170 odd days. I've been very excited, the most excited I've ever been for a Hall of Fame game. I think it has to be said. Joining me just to talk a little bit about the game before we round off the episode is the HuddleUK's Detroit Lions writer, Archie Tooth. Archie, how are you doing?
Yeah, really good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I was just looking. I just Googled the game and it made me laugh really because it said Detroit Lions slight favourites against the Chargers. I don't think you can bet on preseason. I mean, you have to be a serious fan of betting to bet on preseason games when it's lots of fringe players. But it is a chance for players to make a case for themselves, particularly those lower down the depth chart. I got a few Chargers players I want to just highlight, but I'll go to you first as the Lions are the favourites for the game. Are there any of these sort of maybe later round picks this year or players who you, as a Lions writer, are particularly interested in seeing in this game on Thursday?
So first, I just want to say I think I speak for every fan when we're glad to see football's finally back after a long, long off season, and it's great to see. And yeah, I'll kick it off. I've got a few position groups. A lot of them are basically sorted out, but it's just finding the sort of depth players who are going to sort of contribute a little bit over the season. So first, I'll go with the interior line. Obviously, they've had a lot of change there with Frank Ragnow and Kevin Zeit leaving. And in round 2 this year, they drafted Tate Routledge, and I'm expecting him to get some reps at centre and at guard. He did have previous experience there for Georgia, and Miles Fraser as well. They picked him up in round 5, and he's also someone who's also going to play in one of the guard roles. I think he'll get a few reps there. Also, Isaac Tesla as well. He got picked up in the 3rd round. I think I'd see him against Tim Patrick and Khalif Raymond, sort of fighting for that depth role behind Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams. And then for the defensive backs, Ennis Rakestraw, he was quite a promising player they picked up last year in the draft. And he had a naughty hamstring injury in week 2, and it kind of derailed his whole season. So he's hoping to bounce back and win back his role as the nickel. And he'll have to do that against veterans Avonte Maddox and Akeem Robertson as well. So that would be interesting to see if maybe all 3 of them get a few reps. And also edge, which is a massive, massive talking point for the Lions, with only Aiden Hutchinson really the veteran there. They've had a lot of injuries, especially with Levi Onwuzurike out for the season. But I could see some reps for Al Qadim Mohammed and Ahmed Hassanain as well. Maybe not as much as these other players I've mentioned, but I think Dan Campbell just doesn't want to take any risks in case they too as well pick up injuries. And then he really has 0 edge depth there, and that would be a really big red flag going into the season.
Yeah, and I know that's something that the edge position in particular that you've written about for the HuddleUK website already, about sort of who they can pair with Aiden Hutchinson, who of course is excellent and won't play a single part of preseason. I would be very surprised if we see him make any snaps. And the Chargers, on the flip side of the field, Jim Harbaugh has already said that the players who, I think he described them as the regular season starters, they use some sort of phraseology to describe the group of players that he won't be playing in this game. Absolutely not necessarily for the whole of preseason, but absolutely won't be taking part. So I can't imagine the likes of Omari and Hampton, and definitely not the likes of Justin Herbert and Joe Alton, all that. They won't be taking part. But like the Lions, there are some players that I think will be really interesting. The one who I've mentioned on this podcast earlier in the episode as well, when we were talking Chargers and Antonio Gates, is Keandre Lambert-Smith, the wide receiver who was drafted, I think, in the 5th round this year. Yeah, pick 158. He's been making some real flash catches in training camp, and with the likes of Trey Harris, Lam McConkey not going to be playing in this game, it'd be really interesting to see if he can do it on a football field against actual opponents instead of just soft in practices. I don't know if Quentin Johnson will play preseason. That will be a real something to look out for, because it's if Harbaugh's saying they're not playing the proper starters and then he does play, I think that will be a bit of a mark against him, let's say, because Mike Williams has retired. So there is depth role in that wide receiver room. And another player I talked about in this episode, just to rattle off the skill positions, is Aronze Gadsden II, the tight end who they drafted, who's just a big physical dude. I don't think Will Disley and Tyler Conklin will see the field, so I think Gadsden will see a lot of it. And a player who I'm hoping to get on the HuddleUK podcast in a couple of weeks, who is not going to be, if you're just an NFL fan listening to this podcast, it's not going to be a name you probably know of. But if you're a rugby union fan, you absolutely will have known of Jordan Pataya, who was an Australian international Wallabies rugby player who played centre, who played on the wing as well for the Queensland Reds. I mean, an absolutely top-class rugby player who basically followed in the footsteps of Louis Rees-Zammit the year before and has tried to make it through the IPP. He's joined the Chargers as a tight end. I don't know what to make of that positional choice, but I'm just really excited because these IPP players are definitely going to get a shot in preseason to make a name for themselves. And I'd be surprised if he ever makes an active roster, but I wish him all the best of luck. And if he does come on the podcast and soon, I'll be buying jerseys, even if he doesn't make the active roster. So it'll be good to see if Jordan Pataya can make it on. And some of the defensive side of things, I think the player who I'm most looking for this preseason to make a mark is Junior Colson. We drafted him last year. I really big high hopes coming from Michigan to join with Jim Harbaugh. I was like, here we go. We've got this, really exciting young player. I thought he was a bit of a steal in the third round at linebacker, and then didn't really do it last season. Only had 15 solo tackles, 29 tackles as a whole. And there was a couple of games where he just didn't sort of read the play right and gave up a couple of touchdowns. So I'm looking for improvement. There's only 21 last season. So, these are still young guys. We have to bear that in mind when we're talking particularly about these rookies. We're saying that they've got to improve. They're 21. I don't know how old you are, Archie. I'm 30.
I am 21, yeah.
You're 21. There we go. So you've got a long time to improve if you want to be an NFL football player.
What I want to add with this Hall of Fame game, you mentioned maybe people aren't as hyped for it, but I think it's great for these teams who get an extra preseason game to just sort of see how the sort of chart develops, see players in different systems, different packages. And I think the players we've mentioned, they've all got a big role to play, even if they don't feel that themselves. But even just playing a few reps at the end of a game and they end up getting a touchdown catch or an interception or a tackle for loss, it helps out massively for their franchise. So I think these extra games, although they don't want their players getting injured, it really does help.
Yeah, you just beat me to the point I was going to make because, having the extra preseason game for the Lions and the Chargers, you do get that extra opportunity to see players, an extra opportunity to impress, but it's also an extra opportunity to get injured, isn't it? So it's a bit of a double-edged sword in that respect. And I know both the Lions and Chargers very well, run organizations, particularly of late, will make sure that they don't risk the likes of Justin Herbert. I'd be very surprised if he sees the field or Jared Goff at any point pre-September, but you never know. Archie, thanks for rattling off a couple of players, and good to have you on. I'm sure as the season goes on, when Detroit inevitably have another good year, we'll have you on again to talk about the active players, the proper players, the first round picks and the superstars like Jahmyr Gibbs and the likes. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to all of the reporters and guests that we've had on this episode. Football is back. That's all we can say. Football is back. It's an absolute delight to have it back here on the HuddleUK podcast. Archie, thanks for joining us. Thank you very much. I've been the host, Philip Marsh. Catch you next week on the HuddleUK podcast.